Welcome back. Here we are continuing our Enneagram journey with type 3, the performer. So today we're going to continue in the feeling triad. Remember, this encompasses 2, 3, and 4. And these are the people who act from like their heart. So it's the emotions that stem from within. Healthy 3s move toward being loved for who they are, not what they accomplish. And I think that's important because an average 3 sees love as something that has to be earned, not something that's freely given. So ultimately, 3s are going to value what others define as success. They want to look good to the people all around them. They're very image conscious. And then an unhealthy 3 understands or believes that failure is unacceptable. They're unable to admit mistakes, and because image is so important, they will often turn the fish story from being this big into this big. And so we start to see the stories that get exaggerated to make their image look good, to make it be what people want to hear. Deadly sin for a 3 is deceit. But it's not so much the deceit of others as it is the deceit of themselves. 3s tend to lose touch with who they actually are because they're so concerned about the image they're portraying to others and what others are thinking about them that they create this persona to try to win others over, which I think is fascinating.
So for 3s, their internal value is really from their success.
Yeah. And the way others are perceiving them. And so they cast their image of success in whether or not they can feel loved or worthy. If they are unsuccessful, they don't feel worthy of being loved, whereas if they're very successful, then they feel like it's okay to be loved because they've earned that love or that worthiness. Interesting to me, too, is that 3s never want to lose. They have to be the star. And I think part of this comes down to it's because they believe that they are only successful if others view them as successful. And so in some ways it makes sense that they need to win. But it's not necessarily for themselves as much as they want to look like the winner when all is said and done. And so because of this, not only desire to win, but this desire to please others and to try to be what others expect them to be, 3s can be seen as the shapeshifters, which is a fascinating concept. But it's because they're always changing to be what they think they need to be seen as successful. So that's always something that I think is fascinating. It kind of reminds me of some of the other numbers where it's like, who are we truly seeing? Are we seeing the authentic you, or are we seeing what you want us to see? Because we're all in our own ways able to show a side that we want to portray, but 3s, that's like their main way of going through life.
Sure.
So that success, and this is a question I don't necessarily know, that success doesn't necessarily even have to be performance-based. It's in appearance. If you appear to be a successful person.
To someone else. Yeah, it's all about how the other person is perceiving
so it's
you.
anything that I do, so the clarity of my voice, the clothes, the car,
Yeah, so in the book, one of the examples it gives us is this family man, like they're not making ends meet. They're really struggling financially, and he would still go out and buy like the most expensive suits and drive this fancy European car because he wanted to maintain that image for everyone else that he had everything together.
Yeah.
And so, it was very much, it wasn't necessarily that the suit made him happy or that the car was what he enjoyed. Those are the things that made him look successful.
Sure.
To the outside world.
Yep.
I can see how that would be a pretty slippery slope quickly.
Which is where, right, that recognition of where am I in the unhealthy, average, healthy scope is also important to understand, like, am I going down that slippery slope of being someone that I'm really not to the other
Yeah.
people.
And why the Enneagram is so helpful, because that's what the threes struggle with, but each number has their own slippery slope.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the more that you learn, the more self-aware you become, the easier it is to recognize when, I'm like sliding a little bit too far this way or a little bit too far that way.
Right. Which is where those stress and security pieces are so helpful too. I mean, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit with that, but those moments of stress are those moments that we might be on that slippery slope. Like the ways in which we're responding will tell us, like, maybe we've gone too far and need to step back. And so with a 3, when in a time of stress, they retreat towards the negative effects of the 9. And so they will go to the couch and just not move, or they'll lose themselves in unproductive busy work. Basically, they will just shut down, and instead of making forward progress, they will just stall. Whereas when they are feeling more comfortable with what is happening and they're feeling more secure in who they are, they tend to be more warm. They're more in touch with the emotions that they're exhibiting. So 3s really don't like to exhibit feelings for fear of what others might portray about them. But when they're in a healthy state and they move towards that 6, they're much more receptive to expressing some of the feelings that they might be feeling. And 3s are much less competitive and defensive when they're in those secure places. And so I think those are important characteristics and just attitudes and mindsets to be conscious of. Also fascinating with 3s is that 3s like to also keep their friend circles separate, because the image that they're portraying is created for each circle that they're within. And so if these groups come together, a different side of them might be seen by this group than maybe they want portrayed from this group. And so we don't see a lot of that intermingling.
And that can be super stressful.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about like big events, things like, if there's a huge celebratory birthday or weddings or anything that draws a lot of different people together, I could see it being very stressful as to, which image
Right.
do I portray?
That typical movie like Mrs. Doubtfire, where you're two different people and you don't want them to crash into each other.
Yes. Because you have this image to uphold. Also, 3s are very goal-oriented. And this is something I appreciate about 3s, is that their focus is also on efficiency and completing a task. The one thing that's super interesting, though, is they're like, feelings, they just get in the way. Like, just repress your feelings, get the job done, and we'll be A-okay. And so I think that's an important thing to know when we're working with 3s, is that they don't want to have all the small talk about feelings if there's a task at hand. They just want to get it done and accomplish it, be able to check that box off their list of things to do. In childhood, 3s were often told, like, those feelings aren't necessarily okay, or you don't have your own feelings. And so what we start to see is that they try to become this perfect prototype, which is why they're able to shapeshift. Is whatever situation they were in, they felt they needed to be perfect at. And so they would arrange, they would position themselves to appear perfect in those situations. And I think another one, if we're putting it into a succinct message, it's you are what you do. And so it's not so much you're loved because of who you are, just how you are. It's, okay, great job, you got an A, so now we love you for this. And it's not that clear cut, but that's the way the 3s interpret it, is like, only when I did something good or when I was successful at something did I feel the love come from my loved ones.
It's that internal dialogue that seems to be so present, and it's not about, it's been a long time since I've read the 3, but it's not about pleasing self, it's about pleasing others. And so we're anticipating what the others are thinking rather than what they're actually thinking, and that internal dialogue can turn really destructive.
And more specifically, what they're thinking about me, right? I mean, it's it's not like, oh, I know that they have this desire, I'll fulfill it. It's, well, are they thinking that about me? It's that very internal piece that you were just sharing. Yeah.
It seems to me that we live in a culture in the United States that is like geared towards the exact idea that threes wrestle with, which is that like external validation for perfection and for doing a good job. And so I would imagine that it would be maybe hard to be a three, or maybe it would be easier to be a three because you've got the whole world or the whole environment that you live in sort of supporting your fallback patterns of behavior. I don't quite know where I'm going with that. That will be something perhaps to explore in our study.
That whole idea of
But
you are what you do, and the more you do,
Yeah.
the more successful you are. And like you're saying, in a culture where we're constantly being encouraged to do more and do more and do more because the list is never done,
Yeah, that's exactly
it can get really complicated.
curious.
Yeah. Also, threes are interesting in relationships because they're so goal-oriented and like to check things off. Being in a relationship can become another thing to just check off. It becomes almost like a task at hand. And so it's really important for threes in relationships in how they interact with those they love to make sure it's not just another, oh, gotta check off that date night tonight. Oh, gotta check off this interaction. Because it can become very much a goal-oriented thing. So, and similar to ones, a three's heart is also in their work, which can also make relationships very difficult, especially if it's not a work relationship, because work still kind of takes the upper hand sometimes to the relationship, similar to that one pattern. So some interesting similarities, and you know, as we were talking and doing the assessment, 3 was the other one that I scored very high in, and so as you had shared, you know, it comes down to our motivations and
Sure.
some of that. So I'm curious to learn more with everyone too as we continue to go through this, how people interact and.
Yeah, those wing sides. Threes with a 4 wing, it's difficult to be a 3 with a 4 because 4s as well see are romantics who care greatly about the depth and authenticity of folks. These people take having a rich inner life to a whole new level because 3s can be chameleons and 4s value authenticity.
Yeah.
So you get that piece. And 3s with the 2 wing, charming and intimate. Make great entertainers, politicians, salespeople, and pastors. When their lust for attention and recognition overtakes them, or when they feel unappreciated, however, they can become angry and hostile. More than 3s with a 4. They need to be stars.
There are a number of colleagues, especially that I was interacting with early in my pastoral call, who identify as 3-wing 2s. And so it is very fascinating. And I mean, it's a lot of fun to see how those dynamics play out.
Yeah.
For sure. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll close us with a healing message for 3s.
Go for it.
So the big message for 3s to take away is that you are loved just as you are, not for what you do, but for who you are.